Hello, everybody, and welcome to another edition of Inside Guns with your host, me, the Yankee Marshal. You know, I'm getting to be a little bit older. In fact, I'm getting to be one of the elder statesmen of the online gun community. Don't get me wrong, I'm not like Hickok old. I can still get an occasional erection, and I'm not quite tucking my balls into the top of my tube socks yet. But I ain't a spring chicken either. And with the 40-year-olds and the 30-year-olds and even the 20-year-olds coming into their own now, which is awesome, I'm starting to feel a little old. But I thought I would take tonight as an opportunity to use my experience as an older guy to kind of paint you all a picture of what it used to be like. You know, of how good it used to be as far as gun rights are concerned. You know, I want to talk about the golden age of firearms. I wanted to paint that picture for you. But then I started thinking to myself, well, you know, I really don't have to do that because you're living the golden age of firearms. I know a lot of people think differently, and they're probably right now going, what are you talking about? We're under the most threat we've ever been, and gun rights are an all-time low, and blah, blah, blah. And that's just actual bullshit, actually. It's not true. We live in the golden age of handguns and firearms right now. More people own firearms than ever before. More people carry firearms than ever before. There's far more variety and options than ever before. The aftermarket market is way bigger than it's ever been. It never existed on the level it exists now, period. The boutique gun market especially. So we are living in the golden age of firearms. And in fact, we've never had more rights than we have right now. At least not since the 1930s, 1960s. So if you want to look back into the past, you'll see that things aren't as rosy as a lot of people like to paint the picture. And the reason they like to paint the past as this perfect age of firearms is because that's the way they sell you on this notion that somehow we live in an age where firearms are under attack and we are never safe and blah, 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 and all this other bullshit that we're under more attack now than ever. It's more dangerous now to lose our rights than ever. I don't think it's any more likely to lose our rights today than it was 50 years ago. And like I said, we're enjoying more rights now than we did ever before. I know a lot of people like to paint this fake picture of what it was like back in the 60s and the 70s and even the 80s. Well, you know what? I was alive in those years. I was born mid-60s and I grew up in the 70s. So I remember what the 70s were like, and I grew up around guns. And back in those days, no, everyone didn't own a gun. It was way more common in the suburbs and in the rural areas, but in the urban areas, it wasn't common at all. And even though, yeah, you were more likely to see someone with a gun rack in their truck with a rifle on it than you would be today, but it wasn't common. It wasn't every truck. They like to paint like every truck you'd pull into high school and every truck had a gun rack in it. I'm like, well, I don't know where you live, but when I was a kid, most kids couldn't even afford a car when they were in high school in the 60s and the 70s. But the ones that did, no, most of them didn't have gun racks. Some did, especially in hunting season, the ones that had trucks. And some guys had rifles in their trunks. But it wasn't like everyone thinks. It wasn't like everybody's walking around with a rifle on their shoulder or a gun in their truck. That just is not true. It is true that most households might have been more likely to have a rifle or a shotgun in rural areas. And sometimes even in suburbs, which weren't as big a thing back then as they are now. But in urban areas where most of the population was, it was, I think, more rare than it is today that people owned a firearm. Because firearms have made their way into big cities now at a rate that they could have never hoped for back in the 60s and 70s. The only people who had guns in big cities back then were bad guys, criminals, drug dealers, stuff like that. And even when I was a kid, like in the 70s, when people were very likely to own a hunting rifle or a shotgun, they didn't own handguns. The vast majority of people that had a rifle never thought about owning a handgun. Didn't need a handgun. People didn't carry guns around daily. It wasn't a thing hardly. And there weren't nearly as people who had permits, not even close. I mean, it was a tiny fraction of the people that have permits today. And I know a lot of people are going to say, well, that's because back then you didn't need a permit to carry a gun. Everybody could just carry a gun. No, that wasn't true. There were lots of restrictions on carrying firearms in the 70s and the 80s and the 90s and even the 2000s, a lot more than there are now. A lot of states that didn't give out permits that do now. More states give permits now to more people and in a more easily obtained fashion than ever before. When I was a kid, if you saw a handgun, you thought, wow, that guy must be a cop or a soldier. He came back from the military or something, because most people didn't have handguns unless they were like range guns only, like 22s and 38s and things like that. If someone had a hunting handgun, that was rare. And it wasn't until like the movies started popularizing the 44 Magnums with the Dirty Harrys and stuff that people who were actual gun collectors started buying those. But a reason why a lot of those older guns, there's not a whole ton of them around nowadays? Because they didn't sell like they do now. They didn't go crazy with the sales. Everyone didn't run out and buy one like they do now. That's why you're not seeing guns that are made in the last 15, 20 years. You're not going to see big shortages of them in the future. You're not going to be people going, you know what? That Smith & Wesson 686 is awesome. I wish they still made them, or I could maybe find one. No, they'll be all over the fucking place because they sell them like crazy now. It's kind of like how comic books used to be. Most people didn't buy comic books. The people who did buy comic books, most of them didn't keep them. That's why they were valuable later. And then everybody started buying comic books and keeping comic books, and now you can't give the fuckers away. It's kind of the same thing with the gun market as far as the antique and aftermarket values of handguns is going right now. So back in the old days, less people carried. About the same number of people actually had guns for hunting and protection of property, etc. It's just that it was more divided back then. You either lived in a rural area or you lived in an urban area. There were very few suburbs that, really had a lot of population. It was still more divided between country living and city living. The suburbs started filling up in the 80s and, the 90s really getting bigger. So back then, more people didn't have guns. They were more common. They were less politicized, at least in your everyday life, because there was no big market. There was no reason for people to try to terrify you into going out and buying 3 ARs that you can't afford and don't even really want just because you're afraid to get them later, because that big market didn't exist. And there were none of the middleman market that exists now because of the internet. And that middleman market is what is creating this culture of fear. The NRA used to be the one doing it, and now it's this middleman market on the internet. The guys who got to tell you, oh my God, you got to go out and buy these before this person bans them. That didn't exist back in the younger days of mine. The reason they have to tell you to be scared and be angry and blah, 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 and you're under attack and your rights are more at risk now and it used to be so much better in the old days, is because they're manipulating you. No. We've made tons of victories since the good old days. It's better as far as guns are concerned right now than it was in the 50s, in the 60s, in the 70s, in the 80s, in the 90s even in the 2000s. We've won huge victories since then. And we'll continue to win huge victories. It doesn't matter that, the Dems have a slight majority in Congress now. That's happened many times before. And we've still made progress. We've had some setbacks along the way, but we always manage to come out on top eventually, usually because government passes a law, the NRA would sign off on it, would go into effect, and then the people would sue, like a lot of the big court cases we had recently in D.C., Florida, etc., and they'd win in the court, and things would be better. People would take their states to court and say, hey, they are a may issue state and they're denying people the right to carry. We're going to sue them. We're going to get them to be a shall issue state. It's happened many times in the past couple of decades even. Things are going the right direction as far as guns are concerned. Unfortunately, the gun market has become so bloated and so filled with not only companies that want their piece of the pie, so the pie keeps having to get bigger for people to actually get their piece of the pie. And now we have all these middlemen, the fearmongers and the profiteers and everybody that rushed in 2013, especially to cash in on that fear. We got all those people trying to take their cut out now. So they keep having to inflate the market just to pay their own salaries. and justify their own existence. It's kind of like how the NRA, for years, they were the worst thing that happened to gun rights because they kept having to play both sides of the fence, keeping people angry, driving up the market so that they could justify their own existence. And that's what we've got going on now, only instead of being the NRA, it's all these middlemen and all these boutique gun makers who pay the middlemen, etc. But when it comes down to hard facts and reality, it isn't worse off now. We aren't worse off now than we were then. I lived then. I know what was common then. I was involved in shooting sports then. My grandmother was involved in shooting sports. My uncles. So I know what was going on then. No, everyone wasn't walking around strapped like it was the Old West. People weren't walking around with shotguns on their shoulders. In 1970, if you'd walked into a pharmacy in town with a shotgun on your shoulder, they'd have been like, put that in your fucking car or get out. That's the way it was. It wasn't like everybody just walked around with guns and there wasn't nothing unusual about it. No, when you lived in a small town, there was nothing unusual about seeing a guy walk through town with his hunting rifle on his shoulder, dragging, with some dead ducks in the other hand, his shotgun in one hand and some dead ducks in the other. You'd be like, that guy just went hunting. But you didn't see that very often either. But you wouldn't have made a big deal about it if you did. You wouldn't have panicked because we didn't live in this fear culture society that we live in now. But as far as the rights you and I have individually to own, possess, carry, whatever, way better now. The market, what's available to us, way better now. Back in the old days, the 70s, 80s, there weren't as many options as there are now. And in fact, if you look back then at the way guns were designed, especially handguns, you look at some guns back then that were great little carry guns. And you're like, wow, I wonder why those didn't catch on. Well, they didn't catch on because most people didn't carry. Most carry guns were little snub-nosed 38s, etc. Guns were made bigger, handguns for hunting, for range, for competition. They weren't made for a market of people who wanted to carry daily because that market didn't really exist yet. So stop looking back with rose-colored glasses to what things used to be to try to make today look worse. Yes, we face challenges today. I have every confidence we will overcome those challenges, just like we have since I've been around. I haven't seen any major defeats for us since I've been around. We've had temporary things like the assault weapons ban, but we've been making progress. Even on that, it went away. We told people we won't tolerate it being re-signed because it didn't do anything. We won that battle, and we'll keep winning battles. So as far as, like I said, things are today, you have more rights than you ever had. You have more access than you ever had. You had more selection than you ever had. If you want to talk about the golden age of firearms, that's today. You're living it now. Like I said, the past was no wonderland as far as firearms were concerned. It wasn't the Wild West like some people try to portray it. It was a lot more reserved than it is today. And like I said, you had a lot less to choose from. So be glad that you're living today, like I said, in the golden age of firearms, and especially the golden age of concealed carry and open carry. All right, next I want to move on and answer a question from a viewer. Now, this viewer asked me, which do you prefer, speed strips or speed loaders for revolvers? And I've answered this question in a video before. So I think I'm going to try something new today. And occasionally when questions come up where I have answered those questions in a video before, I'm going to just kind of like shoehorn that video in. So here's a look at what I prefer better, speed loaders or speed strips. Now, people who watch my videos may know that recently I did a little video on my new zombie speed loader. Everybody knows what these are. They're little speed loaders. You stick them in your gun, you twist this little handle, it loads your gun quickly. That's why it's called a speed loader. It loads it speedily, I guess. So that's what a speed loader is, and I did a little review on it. And people also know, if they've watched my past videos, that I always say I carry one of these little bullet strippers. Well, they're not called strippers. I think they're called speed strips. They're not strippers like you think of, so don't get excited. These don't have daddy issues or C-section scars, so they're not strippers. They are speed strips. Now, this is a Bianchi speed strip. And so people see both of these and they say, well, which do you prefer? Do you prefer speed loaders or speed strips? Well, I'm going to have to say I by far prefer speed strips. And I'll tell you a couple of reasons here why I prefer speed strips. For one, speed loaders are bulky. They're bigger, they're heavier, and they're like a big rock in your pocket. Now, some people like having a big rock in their pocket, but I don't. Now, you can get little mag pouches for these, not mag pouches, but speed loader pouches to carry on your belt. But who wants something else on their belt? I know I don't. So the reason I prefer these over these is these are bulky. These are very thin. I mean, that's what you're carrying in your pocket, that thickness. You stick this in your pocket, it lays very flat. You can even stick these in your back pocket very easily. And it feels like you got nothing in your pocket. It's much easier than carrying an extra magazine, even if you carry a semi-auto. This is just the most low-profile way that I think you can possibly carry extra ammunition. And that's one of the reasons that I really prefer these. Now, another is the number of rounds. Now, it may only be one more round, but this one, you get 5 rounds. That's what goes in the gun. You get 5 rounds to reload. This one, you get 6. So you got 1 extra round, and more is more. Even if it's just 1 more, it's more. So I like it also because it carries a little bit more rounds. Now, the main reason I prefer these is they're just more versatile. Let's say you're shooting your way to cover. And we all know if you're under fire, the first thing you want to do is try to get to cover. So you fire 2 rounds. Let's say you shoot 2 rounds out of your revolver getting to cover. Well, to use this, you got to fire and eject all 5 rounds. You cannot use this if there's, say, 2 rounds left in the cylinder. You have to empty the cylinder to use it. But if you're using those, you can pop it up, pop out the 2 rounds you fired, use this, strip off 2 rounds real quickly, and this goes real quick once you get used to using them. Pop off the 2 rounds you need, the 3 rounds you need, 4 rounds you need, or 5, whatever you need. You don't have to eject more rounds than you shot. And you don't have to try to hang on to those loose rounds later. Whatever rounds you have are still in this. Even if you use 2 of it, the other 3 or 4 are still just in this thing right here where you can grab them instantly. You don't have loose rounds falling out of your pocket or landing on the ground or whatever. So it's more versatile and easy to use. Now, another thing about these that you don't really think about is if you don't have the cylinder lined up properly when you get out, sometimes these are a little stiff to get in, a little hard to get them all lined up and get them in at the same time. So you got to fiddle with it, and you got to jerk it around a little bit and just get it to work. Now, with these, you don't have to do that. You just pop them into the 1 or 2, spots in the cylinder that are closest to you, the furthest out. It's easy. You just slap them right in. So there you have it, 2 ways to make loading a revolver quicker and easier. I happen to much prefer these. Now, you might like these. If you want to carry 2 or 3 of these on your belt in pouches, more power to you. It's still extra ammo. It's still smaller than carrying an extra magazine. It's way smaller than carrying an extra magazine for most guns. But I'm still going to stick to these. I think I can use these better. I'm faster with these, and I think they're more versatile. So these will be the ones I prefer. Which ones you prefer, that'll be up to you. All right, I hope that answered the question. And now I want to move on and end the show, as usual, with our viewer EDC of the day. And today we have Michael M. And he is carrying his Taurus 692 357 Magnum, which I'm so glad to see people carrying nowadays because I think Taurus is one of the least appreciated revolvers out there when they actually make a pretty good product. And he's got his Altamont grips on it. He's carrying it in a Falco holster, and he's got a trackline belt. And I do want to give him kudos here. At least his belt and his holster are in the same color group. They're both a shade of brown, tan kind of coloring. So at least it's not black belt, brown holster, or brown belt, black holster like so many people do. So I am going to give you kudos for that. I'm also going to say I think it's very creative of you to use that space that is there because of your absence of an ass, that space your ass would normally fill, with a knife. That's a great way to make up that absentee space right there. So I'm actually pretty happy with what you're carrying, the way you're carrying it. I like the gun, I like the fact you got the knife there in the no ass area, which a lot of my viewers seem to suffer from. Pretty impressive. Although the coonhound on the couch there, Maynard, or whatever you said his name was, he doesn't seem impressed at all. And he knows you better than me, so maybe he's on something there. But I just wanted to show today what he's carrying there, a 357 Magnum Taurus revolver. And that is Michael M., our viewer EDC of the day. All right, everybody, that's our show for today. I hope you enjoyed it, and I hope you come back tomorrow. Until then, I just want to sign off, as usual, by saying, as far as the state of the world today is concerned, it is what it is. But like I already told you, it's better than it used to be. And what it will be in the future, if we continue to keep our heads about us, ignore the profiteers and the fearmongers, and live in reality, what things will be in the future as we continue to fight for our rights without allowing ourselves to be manipulated by fear or anger, what it will be in the future is better.